Hi, so today we are with Octavio Paz. Well, in previous interviews, you've been talking about your first literal memories, so can you tell us about?
In general, the mystery of vacation, because it is a mystery, has to do with the childhood. Vacation manifests itself in youth, but there is a period of imitation, we would say, of family models. In my case, the presence of my grandfather, Octavio Paz, was a writer, was decisive. I watched him read and write every day. He knew that he had written memories, novels, so he was a bit of a model for me. Yes, indeed, in my house as a child, there was a great influence from the world of literature. My grandfather had a good library. He also had stands with photographs of authors of the time. There, you could see photos of engravings, for example, of Victor Hugo and other French writers. But not only French, there was also Hispanic Americans, Mexicans. There was Perez Galdos, who was one of his models.
North America?
Whitman? No, I think he's upfront and maybe he was very radical. Emerson, yes, probably. Also Longfellow.
Did you ever talk about literature with your grandfather?
Of course, many times he told me stories I saw him read, and when I saw him pick up the books, for example, when he read Quevedo, I also wanted to read Quevedo. Naturally, he did not understand anything.
Saw you as a writer too?
No, at the beginning, I had the greatest freedom as a child to read the books that I wanted, what I could, be it due to tolerance of carelessness to know what he was reading. So my first erotic revelations I owe to literature. I read a lot of novels that I didn't have to read at that age.
There's also your father, which was a journalist and a historian, right?
Yes, well, much less because my relationship with him was less intimate in childhood. He was not at home and there were great absences.
Those things works unconsciously, right? You knew your father was a writer.
Not only that, I helped him as a teenager to type his articles or texts from memoirs of the Mexican Revolution. Even pleasure texts, sometimes a little from the literary point of view, but the influence of my father was less, much greater than of my grandfather. Later, also, a determining influence was that of an aunt.
Your aunt Amelia?
Yes, she was a great reader. She was very interested in literature, but she didn't translate Baudelaire, as you asked me a moment ago.
She a lover of French poetry?
She was a lover of the novel more than of French poetry. She knew poetry well, especially the Spanish language. She had an album. I have told about it in a prologue of this complete works that we have published in the Círculo de Lectores. She had an album, and there were many poems from friends of hers, poets of the time. Among them, and nothing less, a poem by Gutiérrez Nájera.
Dedicated to her?
Dedicated to her.
Verse of circumstance.
From the Romantics, possibly from Becker. Perhaps before, poems were written for the young ladies of the time. In an album highly decorated with spectacular writing and with illustrations of birds or landscapes. It was a very end of century taste. My aunt Amalia's was immediately prior to the revolution, prior to 1910, an album that spans from 1880 to 19,000. More or less, I still have it.
Apart from your album, did you ever talk to your Aunt Amelia about your literature or poetry, or maybe about your own vocation?
Dedicated to her.
Something that Andalusians also tells you.
She was mostly talking about literature, of poetry less, but I don't remember exactly. She talked about my readings more than anything. Yes, I think she was very interested in her when I started writing. But she died before I really started publishing. Those were the fundamental influences in my mother's case. It was not a literary influence, but the discovery of the Spanish world was for me Spain. My discovery of Spain. That's the windows. And immediate one, my mother, say Spanish music, Spanish cuisine, the Hispanic world, I would say the Andalusian world.
A whole literally family of Romans in the house you grew up. Earned by reading your work, mostly your poetry, that need to recognize something else when it's like end and when you need to start over, as happened to you in 1943 when you wrote The Sample Life.
You like the poem?
It is which I close to prologue to your first letters.
There's also the beginning of something that it is not known.
Bye, Mexico, and thanks for listening
To another kind of poetry and life.